guys? It's the new sensation, Big Annotation here, and I have just arrived home from the most recent tournament ran by Organised Play Events over in Birmingham for Star Wars Unlimited, and I managed to finish top 8 with Cad Tarkintown, so Cad Bane Red, just a couple weeks after the release of Set 3, and a couple weeks after the announcement of the Boba suspension, which was in effect for this event as well. So I'm very excited to bring to you the deck profile of the Cad Tarkintown list that I decided to play, that I built, that I tested in the run-up to the event, and that I managed to take to a 7-1 finish, finishing 6th place in Swiss and top 8 overall. I did unfortunately lose my first round in the top 8. I paired a pretty rough matchup, although I think I had some pretty rough matchups overall in the top 8. It was kind of 50-50 on whether I thought I was able to progress or not based on the matchup. But yeah, very excited to get into this. In terms of my matchups throughout the day, it was an 8-round event, 8-round Swiss. I think there was something like 200 players, so a very, very big event in terms of Star Wars Unlimited numbers. So very cool to play so high in that. And obviously it's early meta, so I was expecting a lot of aggro, which is part of the reason I took Cad Bane. I also don't think I'm really a good enough deck builder to take a set 3 deck and be able to put it together in such a short span of time and short amount of testing. So as much as I wanted to mess around with some set 3 stuff with all of the cool mechanics that has come out, especially with Boba being suspended, there's actually room for that kind of stuff. I ended up just going with a deck that I knew was pretty good from set 2, was definitely going to get better with Boba suspension, and had some pretty interesting tools in set 3 as well. And could just play pretty well into a lot of the meta right now. I feel like it can play pretty flexibly between main and sideboard. It is also worth noting that this event was best of 3 throughout Swiss and Top Cut, so there was no sort of weird best of 1 stuff going on in Swiss or anything like that. So sideboard was in full effect. But getting into my matchups throughout the day, I played 3 Django Red, which is obviously a very popular deck in the early meta of set 3. I played 1 Palpatine Yellow in the 7th round, which was my only loss throughout the day. 1 Sabine Yellow, 1 Set 2 Han Blue, 1 Mace Windu Blue, and 1 Set 2 Han Green with ECL. So quite a wide spread of matchups. Like I said, a lot of aggro because it's the early meta. I'm kind of expecting to see a lot of aggro, which is part of the reason I ended up on Cad Bane, because I think it's a pretty strong deck to deal with a lot of those aggressive decks. I do think the deck struggles a little bit into the Django Red matchup. In testing, we found it really unfavored, so we worked hard to tune the main and sideboard to help account for that and to help deal with the matchup. It's still a pretty tough matchup, I think, but, you know, with the testing and with the adjustments we made, it became somewhat playable, and I was able to beat all 3 Django Reds, which I was very happy with, because every time I sat across from a Django Red, I just assumed that I was going to lose that round. So considering I played 3, I was very impressed that I was able to take all 3. Obviously, some of that came down to just drawing better than them in some cases, but I'd like to think there was some form of skill expression and deck building behind that, considering I played all 3 and won against all 3. Before I get into the list, I have to give a couple massive shout outs. Massive shout out to Krish. If you guys aren't subscribed to the Ibo Academy, you need to get subscribed. He was deathly ill the weekend before this tournament, and he also ended up casting the tournament. So if you guys have watched any of the stream, you'll recognize him. But he was deathly ill the weekend before the tournament, and he decided to take 3 hours or so out of his day, when he'd much rather would have been in bed, to help me test the list and test the deck. And he just played a bunch of the expected decks against me to figure out what my worst matchups would be, so that I could figure out what to tech for. I also get to give a massive shout out to Emiliano from the Nexus, who sent me quite a few Cad Bane lists throughout the testing period, and also ended up taking Cad Red to the tournament. So very helpful stuff there, and also sent me a bunch of different tech ideas. Some were useful, some were not. Biggest hater of Bamboozle I've ever seen. And the last and probably biggest shout out, as always, goes to Tom, who also took Cad Red, and I kid you not, every time me and Tom work on a deck together, it just does bits. Like, that man thinks up some amazing ideas when it comes to deck building, and when it comes to gameplay as well. He is just the perfect testing partner, so massive shout out to Tom as well. But other than that, we will get into the list. So, Cad Tarkintown. To start off, we were on 3 Guavian Antagonizer. Sorry, actually, I will specify, I did have different lists to the guys that I was testing with. There were some different tech choices that went down as well. And I'm sure, well, hopefully we'll have a video, all 3 of us together, talking about the differences and our experiences on the day a little bit more in depth. Whereas I just want to go over card choices in this one. But if you're interested in that, you should check out the Nexus YouTube channel, which will probably be where that ends up. But we've got 3 Guavian Antagonizer. This is basically replacing Greedo at the moment, because Greedo is super weak right now, especially in a meta where Django Red is super expected. Django Red has so many ping effects with the ISB agents, the elite P38s, even the Ruthless Raiders. Greedo is probably just dying the second you play it, whereas the Guavian Antagonizers are not. They can be slightly weaker into control because of the bounty, but like I said, I was expecting a lot of aggro and mid-range, not so much control in this current meta. So I mainboarded accordingly for that. And the Saboteur keyword skill on the card actually came up a little bit today, helping push through some village protectors and other shielded units in those slower matchups as well. Also bypassing Sentinel as well, very strong. And just generally the strategy against Django Red we figured out was to try and overwhelm them in terms of going wide. If you can go wide against them, it is really important. So we wanted to keep some 1-drops in to help with that, but we didn't want them to be Greedo because Greedo was just so weak to the ping effects. And then going into the 2-drops, we wanted all of our turn 1 plays to be really strong into Django, so we ran the strongest 2-drops we could into Django. 3 Crafty Smuggler, the shield stops the ping effects from actually tapping it down with the leader skill. 3 Bazine, this is actually a decently strong turn 1 play into Django because you can rip out the Lurking TIE Phantom, which gives this deck a real headache, honestly. But you can also rip out, obviously, the power cards like Triple Dark Raid is always going to be a good hit as well. Or just trying to brick their turn 2 play, because you're going to be giving them initiative, so as long as they play a 2-drop, you're going to play Bazine. You can ping the 2-drop with Cad Bane as long as it's not a Crafty Smuggler, and then just Tarkintown it, and hopefully also rip out their turn 2 play. And if they've got initiative and they pass into you, most of the time you're going to be claiming, because your deck is slightly better into the mid-late game. So as long as you can survive that pressure and not take too much chip damage in the early game, then their Triple Dark Raid finishes with Fet's Fire Spray, and Ruthless Raider won't be able to push through. Getting to your deploy turn is really important. Well, getting to your deploy turn safely against Django Red is really important. So you're not opposed to just taking a claim if they pass into you without playing anything. And then the 3 Cartel Spacer, the when played effect is pretty relevant, but it's also mainly there for being a 2-3 in space. So you can deal with their 3-2s basically. Going on to the 3-drops. Oh, worth noting as well. So we run a total of 9 2-drops and then 3 1-drops. So 12 turn 1 plays. We decided to omit, I think all 3 of us decided to completely omit Cloud Rider from the list. Cloud Rider is like an okay card. It's pretty good into decks like Sabine. It doesn't do much into Django Red because they're not playing very many ground units. And it doesn't do much into general mid-range decks that you want to, because like other mid-range decks a lot of the time will have better late game than you, especially heroic mid-range. cards like U-Wing, Home 1, Luke Skywalker, Redemption. Some red versions will be playing Crate Dragons. So they just have a lot more top end than you. So going 1-for-1 with a cartel, with a crafty smuggler, even if you're using the Cad Bane ping to trade up, it means that you're probably not going to be using your resources efficiently. Like on turn 2, you'll have to have a 1-drop as well to properly utilize your resource if you're trying to trade into like a Yoda with 4 health. So a lot of the time it's like you're just going 1-for-1. Even if you're trading up, you're only trading up by like 1 cost, but then you need to find one of the 3 1-drops we play to actually make use of the fact that you're trading up and not just lose out on tempo there. So we ended up cutting it. It's pretty much just good into Sabine is what we found, and even then, like, Sabine is already a really strong matchup for this deck, so we don't need more cards to make that matchup good. And the 12 turn 1 plays ended up working out okay. There were some times where I missed turn 1, but a lot of the times, I think most of those were where I got Bazined turn 1 and my 2-drop just got ripped out my hand, so overall worked out okay. And we really needed to find space for some of the other tech choices in the list. So going on to the 3-drops, we only run 5, but there are some like other 3-drops that you do run in the form of some of the tricks, which we'll go into later. But in terms of the units, we had 2 Boba Fett and 3 Punishing One. I chose to prioritize the Punishing One over the Boba Fett's because of the existence of Django space. So we want to have a little bit more space presence there. And I feel like a lot of the time the Punishing One's ability ends up being a little bit more relevant than Boba Fett's. Although I don't think that was the case over the course of the event. I didn't really see many upgrades, which I was expecting to see a little bit more. But again, trimming down the Boba unit because we wanted to find more space for these tech choices. And like, sure, we're only running 5 turn 2 plays that are consistent, but we have quite a few more in the events and the tricks that can be used that are maybe not as consistent or maybe not as optimal, but they can still keep you in the game enough to scale up to your real big power plays. So onto the 4-drops, I opted to play 3 Jabba and 3 Forlom. There was a consideration to cut the Jabba down to 2 copies and maybe side the 3rd copy, because this card is not ideal for the Django matchup. It's just a 2/8, so it's not helping you race them, and a lot of the time you do end up in a situation where you need to be able to race them. The fact that it makes your tricks cost 1 less is very nice if you're able to establish a Bosk, but I think if you're able to establish a Bosk safely and not get it force choked or Tarkintowned off the board very quickly, then you're already in a very strong winning position. So Jabba just becomes almost a win more card in that matchup, and paying 4 for a 4-drop is not great in that matchup because, like I said earlier, you ideally want to be going wide. Forlom is not too bad in the matchup because it can take out one of the ground unit threats that are sticking around. So it can take out things like ISB Agent, which can be relevant because it can use it as a way to tap down your bigger units as you get later into the game. Or it can be used to take out a Greedo if you really need it to, if you can't guarantee the ping on it. Or even if you've chipped away at their leader, then you're able to finish it off with the Forlom as well. So Forlom generally a better 4-drop in the Django matchup, but we ended up keeping 3 Jabba just because it's such a generically strong card for the deck. We have such a high trick count, especially in the version that I ended up playing, and it really is the win condition a lot of the time into control, because this card just keeps your hand so healthy throughout the game that you're able to take 1-for-1s into control decks and actually end up on top of them in terms of card advantage because of this card existing. And it also obviously has the amazing synergy with McClunky. Going into the 5-drops, I ran 3 Bosk and 3 Zuckuss. I wanted to keep the 5-drop Underworld count high because of the existence of now there are 2 of them, which, spoiler alert, we are playing in the deck. However, in hindsight, I was discussing with a couple of people on the way home just now, and Zuckuss really didn't do much for me throughout the event. because just the threat of it existing alone was enough to make people kill the Forloms, because, you know, the 7/7 ambush saboteur is a pretty big threat. So I was never able to resolve that throughout the whole day because people would focus down the Forloms. I even had Django players deciding to swing into the Forlom to prevent this from one-shotting their leader next turn. So just the threat of this card existing meant that people were taking out the Forlom. And when you now there are two of them, this card out, it's a 6/6 body, but it's not really doing much else for you, whereas Bosk is able to help you ping stuff. It also has the immediate impact of ambushing, so it's all round much better. I think there is an argument where you can cut this guy down to at least 2 copies, and maybe fit in some other 5-drop Underworld cards, which I do run in the sideboard, so maybe we can talk about them later. But yeah, I think there's room where you can actually cut down on Zuckuss in this deck. Bosk definitely stays at 3 though. This card is actually insane, and anytime you now there are 2 of them, this card on turn 2, it just feels like you are not losing that game, especially when they don't have very solid removal. And for the rest of the units, we are running 3 Ruthless Raider for top end and 3 of the new Cad Bane Legendary for top end. And this is one of the additions that the deck got from set 3, and it is a huge addition. We all know Ruthless Raider, we all know how strong this card is and how it can both play around Fell the Dragon and takedown ranges in the 4/6 stat line that it has, whilst also having great synergy with cards like Sneak Attack and just very strong reach for this deck in terms of finisher. But the Cad Bane Legendary is an incredible addition to the deck. It's an Underworld Bounty Hunter, so you can, now there are 2 of them in, off of a lot of your cards on 5 resource, and I was using that a lot today. It came up quite a few different times, which was really helpful. This card is kind of your stabilization tool against Django Red, because it can often capture a Fire Spray or a Ruthless Raider plus one of their 3/2s, especially if it's like a 7th Fleet Defender, because then they lose the shield as well. So it's really helpful there in stopping their finishers and just cleaning up a board. It's also very helpful into any sort of blue heroic mid-range, because it's your answer to Luke, which this deck didn't really have the most efficient answers to Luke Skywalker Legendary before this card came out. So it's very helpful there because it can just capture the Luke and potentially some other stuff. And then it also doesn't die to a Luke even if you give them the -6/-6 option because of the 7/7 stat line. So it's actually pretty well protected into that kind of matchup. They need to use a Fell the Dragon on it, which is okay. We have seen lists more recently throughout the Birmingham. Throughout the Birmingham event, I was having a little look through some of the lists, and people have been opting a lot more for takedowns rather than Fell the Dragons, and I think that's because of the early meta being very aggro focused right now, and with the existence of Django Red especially. So we're seeing a lot less Fell the Dragons, so I was able to play this a lot more safely, and a lot of the time they're using like their entire turn or at least half their turn to deal with this card if they are using Fell the Dragon or like takedown or not takedown, Rival's Fool or any spot removal like that, which I'm very happy with, because then I can just play another one to take the stuff back, or I can use the rest of my board to start racing them whilst then redeveloping the board as well. Yeah, this card is absolutely amazing. I tried it at 2 copies for a little while, and then I upped it to 3, and it was so much better because anytime I resourced this when I was on 2 copies, I was just never playing it during that game because I wouldn't draw the second copy. So it gives you the option to resource a copy if you see them early on, but also there are a lot of matchups where I was playing like 2 of these per game, sometimes 3 of them per game, and like I said, it is the main stabilizer against Django Red that I look for. If I can, now there are 2 of them, this card in against Django Red, it is huge, but also as long as I make it to 7 resource safely enough and I'm able to establish this card, I feel pretty safe in the matchup. So a very, very strong addition for the deck in set 3, and just a very strong addition to Cunning Villainy in general, I believe. So that's all the units that we're playing in the main board. In terms of the events, we're starting off with the tricks, and another great addition to this deck is the first trick here. Now there are 2 of them, which I'm playing 3 copies of. This deck has really hit a very nice critical mass of tricks now with the existence of this card, because it is also searchable off of Jabber and also gets reduced by Jabber. This card I used this card quite a lot throughout the weekend. I think I only used it twice or maybe 3 times on turn 2 to play a 5-drop. But there were actually a few times where I used it on turn 2 to play a 4-drop, whether that be a Forlorn or a Jabber, which was very nice just to help me fill out the curve, but also it got me ahead on the board both times, because both of those units are going to be way better statted than any 3-drop that they might play. And then later in the game, you can use it to bring in Cad on like 5 resource or 6 resource, which again, I did say I ended up doing a couple of times as well. The fact that it gets reduced by Jabber is generally not very relevant, because you're using most of your resources for this anyways when you're using it. But it's very nice that it's searchable through Jabber, because it can just help you deck thin throughout the game, and any spare copies that you draw a lot of the time just get chucked into resource if you're not able to set it up. I think there is an argument to look at cutting this down to 2 copies, but I really wanted to try it at 3 just so that I had best chances to start dropping 5-drops on turn 2 and stuff like that, which felt very nice throughout the weekend. But like I say, maybe it is worth testing this at 2 copies as well. And then for the rest of the tricks, we have 3 McClunky. This is like the best card in the deck. This card's insane. Using it to bounce Jabber in the control matchups whilst dealing with their board and searching out more stuff is amazing. And just using it to snipe out spaceships in the Django matchups, or like deal with anything really in the aggressive matchups, is amazing as well. There were also a lot of times where I was just using this to bounce damaged units in the slower matchups as well, to deal with one of their units and then play the damaged unit again at full health, so that they had to invest more into killing that unit. I ended up on 2 Waylay. There was a big back and forth between this and Relentless Pursuit, because Relentless Pursuit obviously has great synergy in the deck, with a lot of it being bounty hunters. Your leader's a bounty hunter when you flip. But I wanted to play Waylays because I was conscious that there would be some control in the tournament, and I didn't want to just like auto lose to it, and I felt Waylay was going to be much better all round for that. It's also got the benefit of being another trick, whereas Relentless Pursuit isn't a trick. And it also fits in this nice spot against Django Red, because Django Red often comes down to a race situation, and on their 6 resource turn, they're generally going to be wanting to play a Fire Spray or a Ruthless Raider. And that can be off Triple Dark Raid or just from their hand. A lot of the time by that point, I found they do play it from their hand, because they've been through most of their Triple Dark Raids on the anytime they draw them anyways. So when you're playing against that, you want to be, if you have Relentless Pursuit, you want to be deploying your leader, and then they play their unit and you Relentless Pursuit it and capture it under your leader, because they're both 6 costs, and then your leader gets a shield, which is great. And that works really nicely if they have Fire Spray and you have Initiative. If you have Initiative and they have Fire Spray, you deploy, they play Fire Spray, and then you Relentless Pursuit it under your leader, which is perfect. The issues start to arise when they don't have Fire Spray and they play the Ruthless Raider instead, or when you don't have Initiative. Because if you don't have Initiative, they play Fire Spray, you flip, and then they just smack you for 5, and it doesn't matter. If they have Ruthless Raider, you can deploy, they can play the Ruthless Raider, and then they just deal the 2 damage to your leader and tap you down, and you can then remove the Ruthless Raider, but it doesn't help you progress the game state in much of a meaningful way, I don't feel like, because you're not able to push more damage there. You're not able to race them in any way. So I found that Waylay was a lot better in those kind of situations, because it would just ended up being more flexible. I don't need initiative to set up my leader deploy so that I have a unit to capture their big stuff under. And I don't need to worry about my leader getting tapped down because I can action stall a little bit until they drop the Ruthless Raider, and then I can just waylay it back to the hand and flip and swing 4 to base. So it just helped me a lot more in those kind of race scenarios. And again, it's got the benefit of being a trick. I feel like I ran a lot of tricks in this particular list. And the reason for that was just so that I had a bit more flexibility when it came to sideboard, because I do want to keep that critical mass of tricks so that I'm hitting off of jabber searches, but there will be times where I want to side some of them out in particular matchups for other cards. So having quite a high density of them in the main board just gave me that flexibility. I think I'm on 10 in total in the main board. And then there were some matchups where I'd side down to like 8 copies of tricks in total. So going on to the last 2 tricks, I ended up playing 2 Bamboozle. And I guess to go with this, I also played a No Good To Me Dead. Because I was going very back and forth on the Bamboozle and the No Good To Me Dead. I really liked the Bamboozle for the fact that it was a trick and for the fact that it was super flexible in the sense that it could be played for free or for 4. And the fact that it can be played for free is obviously very strong with cards like Bosk being able to attach a 2 damage ping to this card as well. There were actually times throughout the day where I was playing this for 4. In the more aggressive matchups, you're going to have a lower hand size naturally because you're not cycling cards like Jabber. And you probably also don't have the chance to use McClunky as much and then also replay the units. So you naturally have like a lower hand size. So there were times where I did have to play this for 4. But a lot of the time I was just playing it for free. It also has the added benefit of having like upgrade removal. It bounces the upgrades back to your hand, back to the opponent's hand, which I thought would be super relevant because I was expecting like Jedi lightsabers or General's blades to be pretty popular. I thought that there was going to be a little bit more heroic mid-range to help deal with the amount of Django Red that was in the format. But, and there was quite a lot of heroic mid-range. We saw Anakin was actually the most represented leader in the event. I just don't think I played very much, and I don't think there was very much in the top tables towards the end of it. But obviously the heroic mid-range are trying to drop some lightsabers on leaders, and Bamboozle is going to be great into that. But it was generally just there to help deal with the Django matchup a little bit more. Being able to use this for free to tap down a fire spray when it comes down is super nice. Or when they triple dark raid in something. I was using this to tap down like lurking TIE Phantoms as well. And again, it's just to help you win that race because the matchup does end up becoming a race after a couple of turns of setup from each of you. However, I wasn't sold on the 3 Bamboozle because I had a couple games where they were just, I was double drawing them and it was completely useless. And I really hate running playsets of cards where oftentimes you just need to see 1 copy. I really like reducing diminishing returns in cases like that. So I wanted to play a copy of No Good To Me Dead because there were going to be some scenarios where No Good To Me Dead was better than Bamboozle and vice versa. I decided to go for 2 Bamboozle because I thought that it was going to be generally better into aggro just for the fact that you could play it for free. So I could it would help me race, and I thought it was going to be really good into Django Red especially, which, as I established before, is a pretty tough matchup to play through. So I wanted to go for the 2 Bamboozle over the 2 No Good To Me Dead, but I still wanted to have the option of using No Good To Me Dead so that if I drew 2 copies of Bamboozle, sometimes it became a Bamboozle and a No Good To Me Dead. And it came up a lot throughout the weekend that I was like drawing these 2, and I ended up just keeping them because it was the perfect draw in that scenario, or that kind of thing. And again, this is obviously a trick, so even in the slower matchups where this card is not so good, I'm still able to search it out, so I'm still able to gain value from that just by searching it and then chucking it into resource as an extra card in my hand. And then for the last 4 cards of the deck, I was running 2 Hotshot Blasters and 2 Surprise Strikes. The surprise strikes were pretty nice. I was not 100% sold on them, but they ended up being very nice just to help me finish games and also one-shot leaders. And then the 2 hotshot blasters are obviously amazing. I think the way that I ended up playing the deck was oftentimes a little bit greedy. I really like recycling Jabber in this deck, and I think I kind of built the deck with that in mind as well, hence the larger amount of top end than you might see in a lot of other lists with the 3 Ruthless and the 3 Cad Banes. So I think there was an argument for me to just go 3 hotshot blasters and then have another slot for something else here, because Surprise Strike doesn't necessarily play into my playstyle with this deck, I don't think. But it was very helpful. It did give me that extra reach into a lot of matchups, and it was also very helpful for making breakpoints with some opponents' leaders. If a Forlorn stuck around, then I could one-shot a 7 health leader on 5 resource, which is pretty relevant into matchups like Django. It also helps me win the race against Django, which ended up being my main reason to include it in the deck, because there are a lot of games where you suit up something with a blaster on like 5 or 6 resource, and then you need to find Surprise Strike or sometimes another blaster to be able to get that last push of damage at the start of the next phase. So I figured Surprise Strike was going to be really helpful for that, and it definitely was. There were games that I won because I had kept this card from very early in the game because I knew it would end up being the deciding factor. So going into the sideboard, the first card is the 3rd copy of the Hotshot Blaster, which I don't unfortunately own. I'm pretty sure I've lost my 3rd copy somewhere, so shout out to Callum for lending me that. The 3rd Hotshot Blaster came in a lot of matchups, and again, I do wonder if there was somewhere that I could have put it into the main board as well. It came into matchups where I was trying to race them, again, that Django Red, or decks like Sabine, that sort of thing. And it also ended up coming into matchups where I wanted to be the aggressor, so a lot of the control matchups it ended up coming in, because I wanted to be able to have the option to push a lot of damage when I needed to. So yeah, in hindsight, I would have liked to have found a space somewhere in the main board that I could fit the 3rd copy in. But I'm not sure where that is even right now, to be honest. So going through the rest of the sideboard, we've got 2 Zyro the Heart, or Zero the Heart, I'm not sure which way. But this is another interesting addition from set 3 here. It's a 5-mana 2/8 Underworld Heart. When it's played, you can exhaust a unit the opponent controls, and when it attacks, it exhausts a resource the opponent controls. So a very interesting card, pretty niche. It also fills the slot of a 5-drop Underworld, so it can be, now there are 2 of them on turn 2, which I think is very relevant, and I think there is space where this card goes into the main board over a Zuckuss or 2, probably just 1 Zuckuss and something else. But I would really like to see this card in the main board as well. This card ended up being really, really strong, especially into the Django Red matchup, because the theory is you can drop this on 5 resource to tap their leader down, or to just tap a general big unit that they might have ready to attack you with. And a lot of the time on 5 resource, they're going to have more actions than you because you're not deploying a leader, whereas they are. So you're able to drop this and then pretty comfortably claim after swinging the rest of your board in. And then if you claim first action, you can swing with this, and it'll tap them under that crucial 6 resource, which means that they can't just hardcast a Fire Spray or a Ruthless Raider from their hand. And this actually clutched up a couple of the games against Django Red for me throughout the weekend as well. It's also just like generally useful if you know that your opponent is going to be dropping some big stuff. Like I was sliding it into the blue heroic mid-range stuff. In the case that I didn't draw a Cad, I could use this to tap down their Luke first action. It kind of acts as an expensive no good to me dead sometimes, but it's definitely worth looking at for that Django Red matchup in my opinion. And there were some times as well where I was playing it a turn before a crucial turn so that I could first action swing with it, similar to what I did in the Django Red. Like, against Heroic Midrange, you play it on 6 resource or 5 resource, and then you swing with it to tap them under 7. I think I managed to pull that off against the Palp Yellow as well, to prevent their Vader coming down. Rest of the sideboard is 2 Fenix. This was mainly there for like other mid-range decks and control, just to give you a bit more top end. In hindsight, I really debated the night before between this and copies of Change of Heart, and I think in hindsight Change of Heart was the correct call. This card came up a couple of times where it was really nice, but not impactful enough to actually swing a game, in my opinion. I feel like Change of Heart could have been a better option over this card, so something to look at going forward. But again, another Underworld card, another card that you can bring in with now there are 2 of them slightly earlier. So all round, not a bad card, of course. 2 Sneak Attack as well. This is a card that I would have loved to have found space for in the main board. I think it would have really helped in the control matchups especially. And I don't think I mentioned, but I was knocked out in top 8 by the same Palpatine Yellow that I ended up playing in the Swiss rounds. The Swiss rounds were very close because he had opted to side out his Devastators, and we talked about it after the game. And I was like, yeah, if you drop Devastator at any point during any of those games, because we ended up at game 3, then I just instantly lost. And he was like, yeah, I agree. And then in the top 8 match, he kept the Devastators in and just completely blew me out with them, both game 1 and 2. So in the top 8, I unfortunately got 2-0'd, as opposed to the Swiss when I played him. I had a very close match and it ended up 2-1 in his favor. But the sneak attacks are super helpful in that kind of a matchup where you just need that extra reach with cards like Ruthless Raider. And there were even times where I sneak attacked in copies of Zuckuss to swing through a Sentinel to kill as well because of the Saboteur. And there was even one time where I was able to sneak attack in a Cad Bane 7-drop for lethal swing as well against one of the Django Reds. So all round an amazing card. Would have loved to have found space for it in the main board, but with the number of other tricks that I've got in currently, and how teched the main board is to deal with Django Red, I don't know if there is space for this at the moment. But this card came in a lot of games as well, and it's very nice because it's a trick, so you're able to flexibly side out quite a large number of tricks when you're siding this card in as well. And then last 3 cards are 2 Daring Raid. There was a consideration to go to 3 copies of this because of how strong it is into Django Red, but as nice as it is, it doesn't actually deal with the issue of Django Red, being the Lurking TIE Phantom establish, and Triple Dark Raid in general being a card with the amount of like strong top-end finishes that they have. But the Daring Raid is obviously still nice to deal with their like turn 1, turn 2 plays, as long as they're not playing Lurking TIE, and then keep your board healthy and established whilst doing that as well. Obviously the fact that it costs 1 is super relevant towards that, because you can use it to fill out your curve, killing their units whilst maintaining a board and actually developing it throughout your turn as well. And then the last card was 1 copy of Relentless Pursuit, which I was siding in mainly in the Django Red matchups, just so that I had more outs to their potential 6-drop plays, Fire Spray and Ruthless Raider, so that I could opt to use some of the answers when they used Triple Dark Raid to cheat them in, and then still have answers for them when it came to them actually hardcasting them on like 6 or 7 resource, so that I didn't just lose the game to like the second Fire Spray that they drew or something like that. So Relentless Pursuit was really nice for that, and I would have maybe liked to find space for a 2nd copy in the sideboard, but again, there was just no space for that, and I ended up not needing it because I was able to beat the Django Reds that I played against, which I think was slightly lucky on my part. But that is pretty much it in terms of the Cad TARKINTOWN list that I played. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video, and look forward to more Star Wars Unlimited content to come. Feel free to drop any feedback. I know the webcam deck profiles are not the standard when it comes to Star Wars Unlimited. but it is definitely my preference. I've always enjoyed going through card by card physically and evaluating them. But yeah, hope you guys have enjoyed watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.